Virgin Atlantic has accused British Airways of a dirty tricks campaign designed to put them out of business. Tonight, the man at the centre of the controversy speaks out for the first time about the campaign against Richard Branson and his airline.
If they'd been able to put him out of business, they'd have been very happy to do so.
Has the world's favourite airline become the villain of the skies? Tonight, World in Action investigates British Airways' Virgin soldiers. Virgin Atlantic's first flight to Greece. Richard Branson's first European service.
Jump in!
I think that there's no question that the last thing that British Airways wanted to see was Virgin Atlantic here in Athens. I think that, obviously if they'd got their way, we wouldn't be standing here today.
Branson believes that British Airways ran a systematic campaign to put him out of business, but he says that being small actually helped Virgin to survive.
One really need look no further than the insect world to see the advantages of being smaller. Since the start of time, the lowly ant has managed to survive, while any number of dinosaurs have departed the scene.
In January, Branson humiliated British Airways in the High Court. BA apologised to him for regrettable incidents, such as trying to poach his passengers, misusing Virgin's computer information, and trying to smear him in the press. They paid £610,000 in compensation. BA denied there was a concerted campaign against Virgin and stated that the regrettable incidents consisted of
a relatively small number of unconnected incidents involving a very small number of employees.
The court climb down shook the corporate structure of the world's favourite airline. All executive members of the board were required to sign statements saying they did not authorise or implement any of the dirty tricks. Then came a reshuffle of the senior board members, with a new position for Chief Executive Colin Marshall.
I have proposed to the board that Sir Colin becomes the chairman, Robert Ayling becomes the group managing director, and I become the president.
Lord King denied that his decision to retire early as chairman was a result of the Dirty Tricks campaign.
We're very happy about it. I want to see the future.
It's not to do with the Dirty Tricks campaign.
Nothing, madam.
Why haven't you taken responsibility for it and resigned yourself?
I have not resigned. I have not resigned.
But why not?
Well, why not?
I think that's enough, ladies and gentlemen.
That's enough.
Not everybody was promoted. BA's Director of Public Affairs, David Burnside, was sacked for his role in the affair. Once described as the most powerful in-house PR man in Britain, he's been paid a reported £500,000 by BA on condition that he does not speak to the press. Burnside's right-hand man, Brian Basham, was also fired.
Tracy, please, Trish.
For 8 years, Basham worked as a public relations consultant for BA at a fee of £100,000 per year.
Tracy, just run through my diary tomorrow, would you please?
He was in regular contact with Lord King and other senior management, including Sir Colin Marshall.
Richard Branson made him extremely angry, and he really did have a much more than King. King saw Branson as an affront. Colin saw Branson as a real threat.
Basham claims that his immediate boss, David Burnside, was under pressure to counter the endless stream of Branson publicity.
David Burnside at one stage said that he wouldn't be able to protect us, as it were, as an agency in holding the British Airways account. We'd lose it if we couldn't do something about Branson.
Many documents relating to Virgin Atlantic were shredded. BA have accepted that this was in contravention of company rules. However, we've pieced together the story behind the Dirty Tricks campaign. Gatwick, autumn 1990. The worst recession in aviation history coincided with Iraq invading Kuwait. As Saddam Hussein declared war on his tiny neighbour, BA took on its British rivals, Dan Air, Air Europe and Virgin Atlantic. Members of BA's helpline team, like Sadiq Khalifa, whose duties included helping passengers to their flights, were told they would have some new tasks. They were instructed to gather as much information as they could on BA's British rivals.
We've been told by the managers we can get it on British Airways computer, the whole information we wanted. And they gave us the code and went through computer, and we got the whole information there about Virgin Atlantic and Air Europe.
The helpliners worked in a secure office in Gatwick's North Terminal. Their rivals shared the British Airways' own computer system, BABS. So with the correct code, it was possible for the helpliners to access highly sensitive, confidential information about their competitors' flights, such as the number of passengers in each class.
We've been instructed not to tell anybody, even our families. Anybody from British Airways staff, any friends or anybody else.
So you were a secret unit within British Airways?
Just, yeah.
The helpliners were under pressure to produce results. If they couldn't get the details from the computer, they had another ruse.
Hello, this is Virgin Atlantic here. Yeah, I'm just inquiring about the number of passengers we had on our flight to Tokyo, Narita. And how does that break down between upper class and economy? Right.
Some helpliners found that by impersonating their rivals, they could get information from their handling agents.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.
So you were pretending to be a Virgin or an Air Europe employee?
Yes, yes.
Did that ever cause you any problems?
No. It was very easy, actually.
The helpliners were instructed to monitor their rivals' flights. At the end of each day, they passed the data in an unmarked envelope to a supervisor.
Virgin details.
Thanks.
World in Action has established that computer information about competitors' flight details was studied here at BA's Marketing HQ in London. It was analysed for commercial purposes, as this internal memorandum to the head of BA's marketing department, Liam Strong, reveals.
I understand that Sir Colin Marshall has expressed interest in Virgin's recent traffic performance and their current fleet configuration. We can still access their booked loads immediately prior to departure. Data captured in the past few weeks suggests the following results. New York, average passengers per flight.
We couldn't understand how they were finding out, if a plane was delayed, or how they were finding out load factors, or how they were finding out, how many sectors a particular company was using with us. We were baffled by that.
The government awarded Virgin the right to fly from Heathrow in 1991. Branson celebrated with another publicity stunt. Meanwhile, British Airways withdrew its donations to the Conservative Party in anger at the government's decision.
I think British Airways felt that for the government to hand routes over, in fact they did feel, there was a lobby to those things, felt that to hand routes over to a small business like Branson was a betrayal.
As Virgin took off from Heathrow, the airline was surprised by a call from a newspaper journalist. He was checking out a story that all Virgin's flights were late departing in the week of their Heathrow launch.
When I said to him straight out, I said, "Is this a story that's come to you from British Airways?" The journalist wouldn't comment, and he certainly didn't deny it.
The story had come from British Airways. The information about Virgin's late departure times had been given to Brian Basham by BA, who had got it out of the computer. But BA's interpretation was misleading. In comparison with other airlines, Virgin's planes had not been late taking off. Basham could not prove his story without admitting that the figures had been improperly extracted from the computer. Nonetheless, he says he was chided for failing to get the story in the press by legal director Robert Ayling.
David Burnside and I were in his offices in St James's, Enchurch House. Robert Ayling sauntered into the room. And he said, teased us. He said, well, the world's two greatest public relations men, you can't even place a little story about Virgin's punctuality. So we said, well, you know, give us the substantiation and we'll use it. But of course he couldn't, because it had come out of the computers. So David told him in no polite terms to get lost.
So Robert Ailing was perfectly well aware that this information was coming out of the computers?
I'm absolutely sure, yes, of course he was clear.
Richard Branson is concerned about this allegation.
If he knew about the existence of the fact that British Airways people could access the information, if he was actually using information from a computer that they were accessing illegally, I think that is good enough reason for him to resign. If then subsequently he lied to the non-executive directors in saying that he didn't know anything, if that isn't grounds for resigning, I would say there aren't any good grounds for resigning on any company.
British Airways tried to poach Virgin's passengers in America as well as Britain, especially upper-class passengers, who are taken to the airport in limousines. BA started calling some of these passengers at home and offered them inducements to switch to BA. Other staff approached them at airports. An angry Richard Branson commissioned this reconstruction based on the experiences of real passengers.
I found it annoying, and in 31 years of having traveled across the Atlantic, I'd never experienced anything like this. There was a young lady who identified herself as a representative of British Airways. She understood that I was flying to New York the next day on Virgin Atlantic, and she wanted to offer me a better service. It's almost like being vended something in an airport that you don't want to buy, that you just can't get rid of it's an irritation.
By January last year, Branson was beginning to complain loudly. British Airways became concerned about the sensitivity of accessing Virgin's computer, but they carried on doing it, as a confidential BA document shows.
It is rumoured that Richard Branson has been contacted by a couple of current affairs programmes regarding his BA Dirty Tricks campaigning. I am surprised BA can still access all Virgin flight information through BABs, such as transfer passenger lists, booked and checked-in loads.
The smear campaign that BA were later to apologise for in court started here at their London headquarters early in 1991. Sir Colin Marshall commissioned a report into Richard Branson's airline and his many other business interests. The report was codenamed Operation Barbara. Operation Barbara was written by Brian Basham. He presented it to British Airways chairman Lord King. It said Virgin was short of cash, that Branson's business interests should be thoroughly explored, and that his flamboyant lifestyle was a danger to his companies. Basham drew attention in disparaging terms to Branson's ownership of a gay nightclub called Heaven. He said that a security firm had advised Branson to close it. This was not true. Basham's report also repeated a false rumour that Westminster Council refuse collectors wouldn't collect the rubbish bags from outside the gay club on the grounds that they contained infected sharp objects.
The worst they could find was something which everybody knew anyway, and that was that I happened to own a gay nightclub. I have no embarrassment whatsoever in running such a club, but I do know that if somebody wants to attack, that's the normal method that they will use to attack us.
I didn't set out to smear him. I set out to provide an objective analysis of his business. And I did that, taking everything into account, including his ownership of Heaven nightclub, his ballooning activities, his erratic behaviour, but also his strengths and his successes.
Nonetheless, were you smearing him?
Well, I've written a letter to somebody about that, and if you examine the Oxford English Dictionary, it says smear is to bring discredit upon Branson. If by shedding light on his business I discredited him, then I smeared him.
Brian Basham says he discussed the report with BA's chief executive, Sir Colin Marshall.
I discussed it with Colin, and Colin thought it was a helpful report. He was very keen to see the report published, and he's a pretty hard businessman. I mean, commerce is a pretty tough game, and Colin's one of the toughest players, and he wanted to see Richard Branson stopped, really.
Brian Basham charged BA £46,000 for the report. Sir Colin Marshall signed the invoice to authorise the payment.
That obviously contradicts what Sir Colin Marshall has told the non-executive directors, if that's the case.
And if that is the case?
Well, and if that's the case, then he's been very, what's the word with the truth?
Economical.
Economical.
Basham says he was instructed to use the report discreetly, to try to place stories about Virgin and Branson in the press, but he was told not to give the report to any journalists or admit he'd written it.
Who told you not to admit to the authorship?
Well, it came directly from Ailing, really, Robert Ailing. When journalists asked me about my report, I felt the simple thing to say, yes, have a copy. But I was told that I couldn't do that.
By Robert Ailing?
By Robert Ailing.
Did he give any reasons for this?
I was just told that we couldn't do it. It was sucked his teeth and said shouldn't do it.
So when Brian Basham started briefing journalists from his table at London's Savoy Hotel, the conversations were strictly off the record. This led to Virgin receiving a stream of baffling inquiries from the media about the financial health of the airline. But Basham's briefings included extra gossip. Was Branson laying off staff? Was he running short of funds? And, most damaging of all, was he having to pay for his plane's fuel in cash? Brian Basham tried to start this rumour, as this secretly recorded conversation with a journalist reveals.
The question of the fuel is something which we can't verify, but it's something which a number of people I've spoken to have heard, and they think it's Shell. We think that he's having to pay upfront for fuel.
That's a very damaging lie about a small airline. It's the kind of story that when it gets into circulation about small airlines normally means they'll be out of, say, dead in the water within, 6 months or something like that.
Presumably there's evidence to support it.
If there's well, no, even if there's not evidence to support it, I think one of the things about it is if you can get that story printed and if it appears somewhere, it is very bad news for an airline.
It was a mere passing remark. It wasn't it was not an attempt to spread a rumour which would have, as it were, legs under it. It was a passing remark, which Branson's made a great deal of.
But who told you to pass this remark?
British Airways didn't tell me to pass this remark. They told me about it, and it's one of those things which happens in British Airways all the time.
The exposure of Basham's activities eventually led to the demise of the undercover smear campaign and to court action against British Airways. But there was still one farcical episode to come. In the early hours of the morning, an unofficial refuse collector arrived at the home of journalist Roger Eglin and stole the family's rubbish. He was a private detective, hired on behalf of British Airways in a secret operation codenamed Covent Garden.
It was a neighbour across the road who told my wife that about 1:30, I think, in the morning, she'd seen somebody sneaking up our path and then disappearing down the path, clutching some black plastic rubbish bags. I rang Teddington Police Station, who went away for a few minutes to puzzle over to whether any possible crime had been committed. They decided there had, and the police inquiries really went from that point.
Operation Covent Garden was run by Ian Johnson, BA's former security advisor. BA had become convinced that it might have a mole who could be leaking information to Virgin. Johnson hired private investigators to spy on journalists and British Airways' own staff. It was several months before Roger Eglin read in his own paper, the Sunday Times, that British Airways was behind the theft of his rubbish. Journalists like Eglin had been targeted as potential points of contact for the BA mole. John Riley, a private detective, was convicted of the theft of Roger Eglin's bin bags and fined £150.
Once the top security people at British Airways start to hire private detectives or investigators who run around the landscape like this, they shouldn't be surprised if it gets out of control and it turns into some sort of a cross between the Keystone Cops and the SAS at work. But it's not the sort of thing that you expect from a reputable multinational company.
Branson believes the BA Dirty Tricks campaign prevented him expanding Virgin Atlantic. He feels investors refused to advance him cash in the climate of rumour and innuendo that surrounded his airline. But now he's set to double the size of his fleet. This is Virgin's new A340 Airbus touching down at Heathrow for the first time earlier this month. But while Virgin expands, these empty offices are a reminder of the demise of Air Europe. The airline and its parent company, the International Leisure Group, went bust in 1991 with a loss of 6,000 jobs. Air Europe was slashing fares and targeting business-class passengers.
We can offer fares substantially cheaper with an impeccably high standard of service and still make money on them.
Harry Goodman's empire collapsed for a number of reasons: overexpansion, the recession, the Gulf War, and a series of sex and drug scandals involving its flamboyant chairman. But there's increasing speculation that there may have been another small contributory factor. The Virgin affair has shed light on some of BA's activities in the last years of Air Europe.
Hi, this is Air Europe. I'm inquiring about our 11 o'clock flight to Paris. Yeah. How many got on?
British Airways were also accessing Air Europe's computer information, just like Virgin Atlantic's.
Well, we had to track every single flight through the whole period for Virgin Atlantic and Air Europe.
Thanks very much. Bye.
How many passengers on board, the breakdown, first class, club class, economy class, male, female, child, the whole day.
But helpliners were not the only BA people accessing Air Europe's computer information. World in Action has seen an affidavit from a former senior marketing executive of British Airways who admitted to doing the same thing.
I was asked by my general manager to access the British Airways booking system to obtain details of Air Europe's load factors at Gatwick. A detailed report on Air Europe was requested, which went into great detail as to the nature of the airline, how it was financed, and who the personalities were, apart from the normal competitive information that my unit was supposed to handle.
There is one other unexplained activity. We've discovered that in late 1987, BA authorized an investigation by Kroll, the multinational investigation agency, into ILG, Air Europe's parent company. Surprisingly, it went through David Burnside's Public Affairs Department, and the £17,500 fee was authorized by BA's chief executive, Sir Colin Marshall. It was paid in 1988 through Broad Street Associates, Brian Basham's public relations consultancy.
I haven't used Kroll in my work for British Airways at all. I'd just like to show you something now, which is an invoice that's come from your company, Broad Street Associates. It's for research work done in 1988, and it's signed by David Burnside and Colin Marshall, and it is for Kroll to research International Leisure Group.
Well, I really don't recall that.
But that is your company that we're talking about here.
Yes, but I just simply, I can only tell you, I've tried to answer you as honestly as I can, and I really don't recall that.
Since we recorded that interview, Brian Basham has confirmed that what he calls a health and hygiene report was done by Kroll for British Airways, because he says ILG was looking a bit rocky at the time. Questions remain about these isolated incidents in relation to Air Europe. But with regard to Virgin Atlantic, Richard Branson is sure about what the stakes were.
Well, there's no doubt that right from the top of BA, they waged a systematic and determined campaign to put us out of business.
Peace talks between Sir Colin Marshall and Richard Branson have now collapsed. British Airways declined to take part in this programme because of the threat of new legal action by Virgin Atlantic. Branson says he intends to start proceedings in the very near future.
World in Action returns in 2 weeks' time.